What does it look like when you are the extremely hyper-vigilant, traumatized person next door, but the hyper-vigilance piece is running your life and no one knows it? These are the symptoms and what it looks like. I'm a licensed psychologist. If we have time at the end, we'll talk about it more, and I'll post a video about healing some things that are related to this as well. Number one, because you were scanning for threat, you are so sensitive that you are walking around hurt a lot of the time. Your feelings are hurt, you're low-key pissed at people, but you don't say anything. Or you blow. And when you blow, you don't really know why, but you blame it on the experience, the situation, but deep inside it's because you are living at a heightened state at all times. The second thing is you always think you're in trouble and people are mad at you. And that is because you're overreading people's sensory responses, their tone of voice, their facial expressions, and you have learned to make meaning. But once again, you often don't tell them, but you create a whole story in your mind about what it actually means. And it's usually something bad about you. You numb, you're addicted to things like shopping, porn, substances, whatever it is, but you function really well in life. So, it's just enough for you to kind of not feel the intensity of your emotions. But when you look at it, it does really affect the quality of your life, the degree to which you numb. Because you were trained oftentimes to make sure you focused on the outside in, that's that disorganized and anxious attachment system where you always look for others to then decide how you're going to feel. You feel like it's your job to make other people feel better and okay. And so you disregard all of the stress you feel the minute you read their stress and you go in and try to help soothe and calm them. The problem is there's a huge hit you take on your own self-care. And so that, if you're not stressed out, you're helping someone else who's stressed out. Now, maybe it's your job as a parent or partner, but in this way, you're doing it to the extremes. And in some ways, it helps you avoid and numb your own pain. But it's also very stressful, but no one really sees that. You often have really high highs and low lows in terms of your mood swings. So you go from like your anxious, very, intense, hypervigilant self to almost completely shut down and turned off and numbed out, like I was saying, but it's almost like a depressed collapse state, but you often hide that from other people. So you might lay in your bed, you might make excuses. And that really goes to the last part, which is you can be very, strong in your isolating dynamics, whether you don't want to go to things and you call it introversion, which it may also be. But the truth is that your internal system literally feels only truly safe when you're alone. And so you find ways to be alone because the hypervigilance is so extremely exhausting. It's important to know this was an adaptation to trauma. And so doing trauma support and healing is the way to deal with it. There's a certain profile of a person who I might call, or you might call, the traumatized person next door. I saw a video made by a therapist talking about how even therapists don't know that they're walking around traumatized. I want to share with you what it looks like on the outside for people who are walking around with often deeply buried childhood trauma wounds, and they have no idea. I'll make a follow-up video tomorrow posting on how to work on these things. You're highly sensitive to relationships and people and noises and sounds, so you feel a chaos inside, but you rarely show it on the outside. But when you get home from being in social situations or work or whatever you're doing, you're extremely fatigued and depleted, and you might even have a chronic illness, but one that people don't really see. Basically, your sensory issues are often off the charts. You have a very strong startle response to noise, to sound, and you're easily triggered by sounds and breathing and things like that. You have major trust issues. You say that you don't, but when it comes down to it, who you really trust, you're lucky to count on one hand. You always think people will end up disappointing you and leaving you, but you don't express that out loud. You spent a large part of your childhood in maladaptive daydreaming, always thinking about your future life, and it was like excessive, and you still do it now. You can play out entire fantasies or future dreams, and that's even how you fall asleep or how you deal with work, how you pass the time. That can also manifest in attention issues and focusing issues. You have a lot of anxiety and worry. You're a chronic worrier, and you can go from kind of high highs to low lows and from like anxiety to depression. But once again, it doesn't stop you from doing your basic things most of the time that people can see. You might collapse in your own house and then lay in your bed for hours, but you don't tell anyone about that. You often numb out through addictions, binge watching, dissociation in many ways. You sort of like aren't conscious. It might even be through sleeping. Once again, most people don't know that about you. You love animals. You love kids, maybe, but whatever it is, the way that you love, even if it's just pets, it's a one-way kind of love where you feel safe. You have wide swings in your attachment, from really anxious, like over-reading things and over-interpreting, over-analyzing, to complete avoidance, shut down, wanting to isolate and numb, and feeling overwhelmed. In fact, when you're really feeling overwhelmed and emotional, the first thing you want to do is go be alone. You always read other people's moods and minds and energy shifts, and if it's anything negative, the first thought or interpretation is it's your fault and you're in trouble or you did something bad. You are definitely an overthinker, a perfectionist, and a very intense internal and external critic. At times you can be a bit controlling. Deep inside you have a lot of longings and hopes and dreams, but even letting yourself want them feels really unfamiliar and scary. You've always had social anxiety, and deep inside you feel deeply unlovable and unworthy. It's me. Hi, I'm the traumatized girl next door. This video is for all of you who watched my video last night and said, oh my God, that whole silent trauma thing, that is absolutely me. I seem fine, but I'm not fine. What can I do? I want to say also I'm tired today, so I'm making this video to makeup because I want to remind all the brands out there that us old broads, we love makeup too. Don't forget about us. Okay, here's the thing. Healing is a lifelong process. Don't trust anyone that tells you that you can just get over everything, because that's not possible. Some things you can heal from, and some things are a management issue. Basically, that you know what to do when they come up. Don't forget, of course, a great therapist is always a great idea, but I know it's not always easy to find. It's expensive, and there are a lot of hours in between therapy. So here's the things I would work on. Number one, deal with your body issues. Stop ignoring that mole check, the dentist, all the things you're ignoring, your autoimmune disease, underlying things that may say you're not doing well. Go see a doctor, get help. Your mental health is absolutely tied to your physical health. Number two, deal with your sensory issues. I know that's a really big thing to deal with. Sometimes you can get help and do exposure therapy, and sometimes you have to actually find a way to set up your life that makes it manageable. So figure that out. Obviously, things like cardio, you all know this, but I'm telling you, it is life-changing to get exercise, preferably in a blue or green environment. Get your heart rate up. Learn guided meditation. I love the app called Insight Timer. It is my favorite one, and it walks you through meditation. It's much easier than the whole think about nothing meditations. The next thing is, of course, do inner child work, reparenting work. Work on seeking joy and losing yourself in something. Play with toys. Learn art, learn new hobbies. Find ways to deal with things that you love that make you happy. The next thing is do your shame work, set your boundaries, deal with your current parent relationship, especially if those are the people that gave you trauma in the first place, and understand that you will actually lose some people in your life. That is just how it goes when we heal. Learn grounding techniques for things like dissociation and maladaptive daydreaming. Work on accepting yourself, reading, educating yourself, books, podcasts, courses, you name it. I love to think about things like, who is being triggered right now? Who is showing up? Is it my child self or my adult self? Do work on letting yourself want, for the love of God. So many of us have suppressed our needs, our feelings, our desires, our wants. Work on connecting to your true self. Do identity work. Who actually are you? Who were you, and who do you want to be? The other thing is this narrative you have in your mind, it is so shame-based that you are unlovable and unworthy. That is a child's belief system and a child's interpretation of living in trauma, but those things are not true. When you start to work on yourself, you begin to set up your life in a way that says you are lovable, you are valuable, but you're never going to feel perfectly healed, and that is okay. You can still live a beautiful life. Some days are really fucking hard. That is just the absolute truth. And lastly, never stop learning and growing about yourself. This whole makeup thing, I am falling in love with it again. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but it is so much fun. So what are you going to do today to start to work on healing your life? Post in the comments. Okay, I just posted a video on what to do to help heal your silent complex trauma. And I was really tired this morning, so I did it using makeup. But what I want to say is this is actually really important, and I hope you can see me. Let me fix the light. Hold on. Oh, shit. Well, that's one way to do it. Okay, so what I want to say is this. I'm wearing my Trust No One But Yourself t-shirt, which is obviously part of my own complex trauma. Okay, avoidance. Okay, here's the thing though. The reality is that if you do all the therapy in the world and you do not deal with the parent situation that you're in, and when I talked about a progression, what I suggest is that if possible, you start with trying to make, connections and communication and have conversations, and this is where you hurt me. And some parents will be able to respond to that and say, I'm sorry I hurt you, and I'll go to therapy with you, and I want to grow and learn. Don't discount that. The next level is parents who don't seem able to do that, but you don't want to fully go no contact, or there's reasons to have what we call a surface or what's been called a tea party relationship, which I like, which is that you keep it about them, you keep it minimal, you keep it simple, you hold good boundaries. And for some parents that don't really want to have close connection, that will work. That will be very threatening and triggering to parents who do want to have that very boundaried kind of relationship that they've had with you in the past. And so that's not going to work, which often escalates to where basically you end up deciding to go no contact. And here's what I'll say about no contact, that I have never seen anyone do it without working through it and trying, because we don't want to lose the core of what should be one of our safest support relationships in our lives. We don't want to lose that. But when it reaches that point, there's the idea of going no contact, but there's so much more, which is why I talk about it honestly in my course, because it's like, how are you going to handle birthdays and holidays? And what if there's an illness? And what if there's a child that's old enough to reach out to them? Like my kids were teens when I went no contact. So I couldn't manage or control that. I had to talk to them about it and help them make their own decisions and also step out of the relationship. But I had to spend a lot of years in therapy working on staying no contact. Like I'd be like, wait a minute, why did I do that again? Because your brain wants to have relationship, parents. Our brains want to be close to you, but you have to be willing to be open to change. And so there's going no contact, there's how you're going to do it, and then there's staying no contact. And that's just not the physical boundary stuff and the holidays, but like the emotional part. It's a whole process. There's a lot of grieving work to be done, and then maintenance and healing on yourself that often goes long beyond. Once you get out of the chronic toxic cycle, it opens up the space for a lot more wounding, but also a lot more healing to occur. Nothing is more difficult than trying to parent through your own trauma. Here's what it looks like when you are silently suffering with hypervigilance symptoms and you don't really know that's what they are. And you did have some kind of complex trauma, some kind of like difficult childhood or difficult parenting relationship. Parents were eggshell, they were neglectful, whatever it was. And you're trying really hard to not be your parents, but you're suffering. Here's what basically hypervigilance can look like. Number one, you tend to freak out and have like blow-ups over things that technically you think you shouldn't be freaking out over. But it's like at all times you're holding so much anxiety and panic and stress and threat inside as you're parenting that when your child has a meltdown or they get angry or you're chronically exhausted, that it feels like you have these emotional outbursts and you have them often and you feel like you can't control them. And you feel a lot of shame and guilt and you feel bad about yourself when you do it, but you can't seem to stop it. You're always thinking the worst thing is going to happen to your child. If you're at the playground, if you're at school, if they're at school, whatever it is, you're always imagining and playing out the worst case scenarios for what's going to happen to them. Even when they're little, when they're bigger, whatever it is, you're a chronic worrier. You are really overstimulated by the park, by school events, by crowded places, by all the things that you're supposed to do to give your child a social life. Those things are just like you dread them. They are so stressful and upsetting for you. You don't want to go. And at times you feel like you don't give your kid enough social stuff. And so you feel bad and you go. But when you get home, you are depleted and exhausted. Also, when you're there, you don't really enjoy yourself socially for the most part. It's not always terrible. But when you get home, you're like, why did I say that? Or what did she think about that? Or maybe I overshared. So you like overplay the whole thing in your head and then you don't feel good about it. Along those lines, like I said, you often want to skip a lot of things and you feel really bad about that. The next thing is you take, like I said, things really personally. So if the teacher sends an email or mom says something or a parent or a dad, whatever it is, or your child, it's like, I don't like this thing. It's like, even though you know in your adult brain it shouldn't be that big of a deal, it feels really personal and really hurtful a lot of the time. And in some ways you make it to mean in your head like you're not a good parent or not a good partner or not a good person or you're not worthy. You find yourself over-focusing on reading your child's emotions, your spouse's emotions, whatever it is. You're just an over-reader and over-interpreter, and everything means something. And so you're like, what's that face about? Or what's going on? And at the time, it might not be that big of a deal, or you might be right, something is going on. But it's like you can't turn that part of yourself off. And at times, it causes interpersonal difficulty between you and your child or other people. They're like, it's not a big deal, relax, mom, whatever it is, or dad. At the end of the day, you just kind of feel low-key annoyed with others. That's like, you're having these like fights in your head with them or comments in your head, but there's just this dialogue going on all the time that feels depleting and exhausting because at the end of the day, you're sort of over responding in that fight or flight mode all of the time, and you are chronically exhausted. So you love someone who you think is really walking around with silent trauma, but they haven't told you that, and you don't really know what's going on. These are some signs and symptoms of what it looks like for your partner or someone you love to be chronically struggling with trauma as part of who they are, and especially hypervigilance. Number one, they often just blow at you out of nowhere. You cannot figure out what you did wrong, but it seems like they're fine and then they're not fine. And when you try to talk about it and they try to explain it to you, you don't really get it. It doesn't seem to make sense to you. But all you know is that it seems like you're walking on eggshells with them emotionally. Your partner is a chronic worrier about everything. The kids, the family, the dog, the relationship. They cannot stop. Their brain just goes constantly and chronically into the worst case scenario. And you might think it's like, relax, it's not a big deal. But you can really see that they can't stop it and how difficult it is for them. They tend to want to hesitate in going into crowded events or spaces. They always have an excuse of why they don't want to go to public events or movies or social events. And when you're there, maybe you have a good time, but you can tell if you're really watching your partner that they're doing it really for you and that it's very triggering. And when you get home, they're completely depleted and wiped out and fatigued. And it takes them a while to kind of recover again. Along those lines, they often seem to want to avoid social events. And you might fight about it. Like, you don't get it. You don't understand why they just can't suck it up and go do things, or why they need to be alone. In fact, you feel rejected sometimes because they just need to go take a walk alone or watch TV alone or go run errands alone. And everyone is allowed to be alone. But it's really clear that you are not invited, and you need to understand why they're doing that, because you're making it about you. It's not about you. Your partner takes things really personally. Anything that would just be feedback or just suggestions, and maybe you're not, maybe you are being critical, but maybe let's assume you're not. Everything feels like you just can't say anything because you're so afraid they're going to like perceive it as criticism and then feel rejected and bad and unlovable and unworthy. You don't know why, but it feels like your partner can overread your facial expressions or your tone of voice. In fact, you'll think you're being kind of neutral by saying something, and they're like, what does that mean? What are you talking about? What's going on? Or maybe you are like upset and they always seem to nail you on it, and yet you're not used to that. And so you deny and minimize and say like, no, I'm not. What are you talking about? And then that can cause a fight. When you watch them, they seem to have a lot of difficulty in relationships. It's like they want to be close, but they pull back. They want to be close and they pull back. Now, this can also be related to other things like borderline, ADHD, all kinds of trauma and or unrelated issues, neurological issues. But at the end of the day, you're not really dealing with it. You're avoiding it. And so it's okay to say, hey, babe, I've been noticing these things and I really care about you. I'd love to be helpful and supportive. Let's figure out what we can do to support you.